Welcome to the Lia Andrews Show. I am very happy to have with us today Dr. Phil Garrison. He's an associate professor at Pacific College of Oriental Medicine for their doctoral program. He's also a scholar and practitioner of Chinese medicine. Welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Leah. It's good to be here.
Oh, good. So today we're going to be discussing a topic that's really interesting for me, and that's Jing, our essence, our innate vitality. It's really important for both lay people and for any practitioner of medicine, and especially Chinese medicine. So what does Jing mean to you as a scholar?
Well, that's a really good question. And when I was thinking about what to talk about, I think this is one of the biggest challenges. It's one of those terms that we hear so much. Those of us who practice Chinese medicine, we hear Jing, Qi, Shen all the time. But Jing is a little bit tricky to pin down, I think. So I took a look at some texts. The way that I like to teach in my scholarly way, hopefully, of explaining things is we'll look at different conceptions of Jing. I think as any of your viewers who are familiar with Chinese medicine will know, the most common translation of Jing is essence. I think that's an okay translation, but one of the challenges I think that we face is how do we avoid cultural bias? We're obviously Westerners talking about Chinese medicine. How do we get at that notion of what Jing was when some of our core texts were written? I've seen other translations of Jing. Some people will take a very literal approach and translate it as semen or sperm, or seminal essence. I don't really like those translations. I think they're too narrow. The other thing that modern practitioners like to associate with Jing is like DNA or genetic code, and I think that's reasonable. The idea of DNA, but again, I would say the concept of Jing goes a bit further than what we typically think of. If we were to limit it only to DNA and genetic material, I'm sure based on your own studies, it gets an aspect of Jing, but not necessarily the whole thing. So when I discuss it, I'm primarily going to leave it untranslated, but I will give you and your viewers context from some of these books, not only from Chinese medicine, but some of the books that are more philosophical. So the first note about Jing that I pulled in is actually from chapter 49 of Guanzi. And Guanzi is a text that most historians date to toward the end of the Warring States period. And I don't want to go too much into history, but those of your viewers who are familiar with Chinese history will know what that means. So this is how the chapter 49 of Guanzi describes Jing. And it says, "The Jing of all things is that which brings them to life. It generates the 5 grains below and becomes the constellations and stars above. When flowing amid the heavens and earth, we call it ghostly and numinous. When stored in the chest of human beings, we call them sages." And I think that last line is something that really speaks to how Jing is mentioned in Chinese medicine, specifically in Su Wen chapter 1, which of course, as you know, is one of the books of the name Jing. For those viewers who may not know what Su Wen is, there are 2 books of the Huangdi Ne Jing, otherwise known as the Yellow Emperor's classic on medicine. One is called the Su Wen, or Basic Questions. The other is Ling Shu, which is sometimes translated as Spiritual Pivot or divine pivot, spiritual axis, things like that. So that was the description from Guanza, which is a fairly early description. I thought it might be nice to start off with that as, you know, a way of kind of getting some context.
And I think too, what that kind of ties in is that all of these concepts like Qi and Shen, they're not just human. You're talking, there's a correlation, universal correlation. So I think that's another reason why it gets dangerous to, not dangerous, but not inaccurate to specify sperm or DNA or these very specific things.
Right. Yes, indeed. So I thought the next place to go that would be useful to your viewers is Su Wen chapter 1. I know based on your own studies and what you've written, I know you're very familiar with this chapter. It's one of the chapters of the Neijing that really focuses on the nourishing life practices. And I think it's such a crucial discussion for those of us who practice Chinese medicine, particularly in the West, where we're always 2 or 3 steps culturally divorced from the essence of Chinese medicine, even the language, the ability to access the text, read them in the original Chinese is a skill that not many practitioners in the West have. Those that can are in the minority by and large, and so many of us are reliant on English translations and finding the best English translation. But Su Wen chapter 1, I'm actually about to teach in the doctoral program at PCOM in just a few weeks, so it's fresh on my mind. But one of the things that's so great about it is it tells us exactly how to assist our patients so that they can live a long and healthy lifestyle. The challenge of that, of course, is, well, the way to live a long and healthy lifestyle is somewhat challenging to do in our modern age. And you know, I always love quoting from Su Wen chapter 1 simply because if we take the general historical dating on it and we assume it's written about 2,000 years ago, the idea that they were having these problems 2,000 years ago only underscores how much further from the Tao that we've gotten as a society. So I think Su Wen chapter 1 is the first place to start. And just to give a little background to kind of bring us up to speed on the section that we're going to focus on, or that I chose as something worth talking about. Su Wen chapter 1 begins with sort of a very brief biography of Huangdi, who of course the book is named after. It's traditionally called, translated as Yellow Emperor. Some people prefer Yellow Thearch. And this biography that's in the Neijing is just maybe 4 lines or so. And it's almost verbatim from a text called Shiji, which is the Records of the Grand Historian, which was also written during the Han Dynasty. And so it begins with just sort of a, hey, we named the book after the Yellow Emperor. This is who the guy was. And then we get right into a dialogue, which was very popular at the time that the Neijing was written. Dialogues between Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, and one of his advisors. So Huangdi asks one of his advisors, who here originally is identified as Tian Shi, which would mean either, you know, heavenly or celestial teacher. It's worth noting here that Tian Shi is the same name that is applied in Taoism. There's a particular sect that is associated with the Longhushan, which is a mountain in China. It translates to basically Dragon Tiger Mountain. And it's sort of the hub for Zhengyi, which is like Orthodox Taoism. And they refer to the person who sort of embodies the teachings, the original teacher, and then through subsequent generations as Tian Shi, the celestial master, the celestial teacher. So it's interesting here because Huangdi's asking the celestial teacher these questions. And he's saying, back, I'm going to paraphrase here just for your audience. Back in the day, the sages of antiquity lived these long lives. They lived to be 100 years old without getting tired, and they just sort of passed on without any drama, without any disease. They lived out their allotted lifespan. What happened? How come people nowadays, meaning 2,000 years ago, don't do that anymore? And so now Tian Shi is identified as Qi, who is one of the major advisors to Huangdi throughout the Neijing. And he says that these ancient sages, they knew the Tao. They were familiar with the Tao. They modeled themselves on yin and yang, which of course, as you know, as your audience knows, yin and yang are fundamental concepts to Chinese medicine. So I won't spend any time identifying them. But they modeled themselves on yin and yang, heaven and earth. They followed the cycles. They didn't eat too much. They didn't drink too much. They went to bed when it was appropriate. They worked when it was appropriate, and they rested when it was appropriate. So, people were just on some level, they just they were part of nature, which of course for us as modern Western humans, we are very divorced from nature in just our lifestyle, in our culture, all of these things like, incandescent lighting and air conditioners and heaters, and we can sort of manage this kind of baseline all the time, which is not how heaven and earth respond. There are cycles of qi, specifically yin and yang qi, in heaven and earth. Of course, now speaking toward the early part of January, we've gotten past the winter solstice. So now we're at the part where the yang qi, although the yin qi is still dominant, the yang qi is starting to rise. And so the sages were aware of these things. And that's basically what Qi tells Huangdi. Back in the day, people just knew how to live properly. They didn't have to try. They were just, that's, on some level, that's the Tao. Like if you're part of the Tao, then you're one with heaven and earth, and you hold yin and yang in your hands, and all these very poetic metaphors. So Qi goes and basically tells these stories about the sages, and then he gets into what's going wrong today. Again, today meaning 2,000 years ago, but equally appropriate to us. And he says that the problem is today people drink too much. They sort of allow themselves to behave in ways that are perverse in some mention, not necessarily, I know that term has sexual connotations, but not necessarily that, just, like a perversion of the Tao, maybe would be a better way to say that. They get drunk and then they enter the bedroom. And this is where we get to the first point that I really wanted to touch on, which is when by doing these things, by living out of harmony, eating and drinking without regularity, having sex when it's inappropriate, they squander their Jing. Okay, so they squander this thing that we're talking about. And so that gives us a good sense of how we can help our patients, or on some level what we're being instructed to do, not just for our patients, but in our own lives as Chinese medicine practitioners, which is not easy, even for those of us who would discuss these things and read about them and spend time. And I'll just continue a little bit more in the passage, but there's a mention of the spirit. And we're going to see as we go on a little bit later, there's a very strong connection between the Jing and the Shen, or this, often translated as spirit. But as Elizabeth Rochat de Lavallée points out in her work, this is a yin-yang pair, just like when we see shui qi, blood and qi, that's a yin-yang pair as well. So is Jing and Shen. And so that's important to keep in mind, because of course, that gets us back to where it all goes, which is yin and yang and heaven and earth and these things. So what we get from this passage is the notion that desire is a problem. It's not just that we're out of harmony, but the way that we get out of harmony is desire. And that, of course, brings us to concepts that parallel very closely Taoism, which perhaps we'll talk about later on. But I took a commentary from Zhang Bin on one particular line in this passage. And just again, for those of your viewers who may not know Zhang Bin, he was an author and commentator and practitioner that lived at the end of the Ming Dynasty. And he wrote what is considered to be one of the greatest commentaries on the Neijing, which is called the Lei Jing, or I think it's usually translated as like codified classic or something like that. But he had a commentary on this one particular line that I thought was very appropriate. And the line that we're talking about, again from the Su Wen, is through desire, they exhaust their Jing. Through being wasteful or wastefulness, they scatter their Jun, which is generally accepted to be the true qi. We talk about Jun qi in Chinese medicine. So what did Zhang Bin, who's also known as Zhang Jingyue, say about this? He said, desire must not be encouraged. When desire is encouraged, the Jing will become exhausted. The Jing must not become exhausted, because when it is exhausted, then the Jun qi scatters. He also says, Jing can engender qi, and qi can engender Shen. And then finally, he concludes by saying, thus to be good at nourishing one's life, which is the term that you are no doubt familiar with, Yangsheng, one must treasure their Jing. When Jing is abundant, qi is exuberant. When qi is exuberant, the Shen is complete. The Shen is preserved. When Shen is complete or preserved, the body is healthy. When the body is healthy, diseases are few. When the Shen and qi are solid and strong, one can still be robust in old age. All of this is rooted in Jing. So what do we have there that we can take away clinically? We've got, a treasure trove there of information that on some level is extremely practical, but on the other hand, as I said from the outset, is a little bit tricky. Because how do we do this? How do we ourselves do this, embody this, so that we can be an example for our patients, and so that we can encourage them to follow this information from the Neijing? And that's why I chose to start talking about Su Wen Chapter 1, because it's such a fundamental understanding of health, and it's the Su Wen is very clear, and these commentaries are very clear. It's desire and all these things, but at the root, it's about preserving one's
Even the cycles are, like we talk about climate change, even the normal cycles, even if we shut off all of our electricity and went to go live in the woods, even our normal cycles are no longer the same. We can't get food that hasn't been polluted, or the GMOs are being carried by the wind, all over the place. So it's like, it's a huge challenge to live up to those things now. Yes,
I know one of our mutual friends, colleagues, and teachers, Zev Rosenberg, is, of course, working on some material about that. And the person who taught me the Neijing and the classics, he goes by his American name, which is Kevin Zhu, but his Chinese name is Yanzhang. He said once, and this sort of ties back into your notion of climate change. He was talking about our sort of obsession with fossil fuels. And he said, what are the fossil fuels? The fossil fuels are the Jing of the earth. Mm-hmm. And we're extracting this Jing of the earth and burning it. And by doing so, we're creating this sort of yang pathology within our environment, which, if we refer to as climate change or global warming or what have you. So yes, indeed, like as time goes on, we're being increasingly challenged to live in this way.